Hello YouTube peers and welcome to a new series of videos. Today we've got how to play Soraka in League of Legends. I'm going to look at some of these guides and point out some problems with them, and then we will then talk about how to actually play Soraka. So this page is actually, this is one of the best builds. There's not really much glaringly wrong with it. The only issue I have with it is that it has you starting at the Spell Thief's Edge. It also says optional back Dark Seal, which is debatable whether or not that's actually good. I haven't really tried it. Also, the Astral Infusion, leveling up first, is absolutely completely wrong. The point about the Caitlyn being ideal is pretty solid, though. I'm not really going to comment on the Blitzcrank one. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other there. And I didn't read anything below that. As for these items, Rabbitin's Death Cap is not good. The rest of these are fine. I personally don't like Ardent Censor because I don't feel like she gets value from attack speed, so I personally would advise against it. But if you feel like your ally really needs the attack speed and you want to take a chance on them, then by all means take it. A lot of these items provide you some resistances, whether it's HP, magic resist, or armor, as well as giving you ability power or cooldown reduction or mana regen. So all these items are pretty solid, or they boost your healing power, which is nice. I'm not even sure what this item is. Like, this item's kind of trashy because it doesn't actually give you any resistances. So I would strongly recommend you don't take it unless you have a sound strategy with your team where it would actually make sense. Font of Life, typically not the best resolve rune choice. I would say that this should probably be replaced by Second Wind because that helps keep you alive. But if you're running Summon Airy anyways, then maybe this is the correct choice. Debatable, but I definitely think in low ranks you're not going to get very far with Font of Life in general. In the high ranks though, then this might be a really solid choice of runes. Next guide. So that's probably the best one that I've seen. Let's take a look at the next one, which is the second top rate. Look at this. People don't take the champion seriously. Otherwise guides like this wouldn't exist. I downloaded this. It's got some issues. Conquer isn't necessarily garbage on her, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's not in my top 5 keystones for her. So yeah, all of these items fall into the category of attack damage items that you would never buy on champions that don't scale with attack damage, unless you're stubborn and like to do things the wrong way. Trinity Force, I suppose that's a decent item on Soraka. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but if you have to buy an attack damage item, I guess this is one of the ones you could buy. Guardian Angel would be more recommended though. If for some reason you're not taking stuff that actually helps your mana, then Guardian Angel will actually help your mana when you revive. It gives you 30% maximum mana restored. So that's pretty cool. On top of that, it gives you all that armor, which Soraka needs. Armor, magic resistant HP, those are stats that she likes. Because if you don't keep her alive, you're not going to be able to help keep your team alive. So, Black Cleaver's okay as a helping item. There's nothing wrong with it inherently, but she's going to have a hard time reducing the enemy's armor sufficiently without a generous amount of investment spent on her attack speed, which honestly isn't worth it. So I would personally never recommend getting Black Cleaver on Soraka. But I could see an argument for Trinity Force and definitely Guardian Angel. I would say it's top tier out of everything on this list as the Guardian Angel is. Mane Mune, that's not really worth taking. She generally doesn't have mana problems. Again, she doesn't really need the attack damage. And stuff like lethality and critical strikes, those are all big no-nos. It doesn't make any sense. So another guide I clicked on that actually looked kind of interesting was this one, because This one actually has the keystone that is my most recommended keystone on Soraka. Again, though, we run into the problem of them recommending Font of Life instead of, well, in this case, because they have Grasp, the best choice would be Demolish. But I don't fault them too much for taking Font of Life. It's not really a big deal to swap that out for Demolish. So that doesn't really hurt my overall opinion of the guide, I suppose. But I do think, the higher tiers, again, it's probably going to be more valuable than the lower tiers. So if you're still low ranked, you're probably going to want Demolish. Like, honestly, you might want Demolish anyway, because it's just really good. Like, taking tower plating is super important. You want that gold. There's nothing wrong with Gathering Storm, but if you are taking it, again, you're going to want to consider getting mana items, which you're probably planning to buy anyway, so maybe Gathering Storm's fine. Transcendence, super good on her, I suppose. Anyway, is that what I was taking when I played her? Now that I think about it, I didn't screenshot that. I feel like such an idiot. Let's go take a quick peek. I actually got Mana Flow, Ban, and Celerity. Now, okay, so I think these two runes are not very important. I think the runes that are most important are Second Wind and Revitalize, and this rune gets those and the Keystone. So the reason why these runes are here is because there was a Karma rune page that I was altering for Soraka. So I don't think these are all that important. These are fine choices. What I picked were fine choices as well. It's hard to mess up these. As long as you're getting these two and you have a solid keystone, then you're good to go. As for these items, he's recommending you start with the 5 attack damage item, which is weird. I wonder if he meant to put in Spell Thief's Edge, but it does say carry, so I think he's intending for this to be bottom position Soraka. He's going to be the farmer, which doesn't make sense to me because you're going to be punished for excessive minion kills, so that's a problem. So it's pretty confusing why he's setting this up like this. Well, I guess his idea is you want to push the wave with your extra attack damage, but don't actually execute the minions or something like that. I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to execute the minions, because sharing cannon gold is really helpful for pushing. Like, if that thing has a lot of HP and you can execute it, like, they actually buffed it. A while ago, ranged execution wasn't as good as it is today. In 2021, ranged execution is really good, and a lot of people haven't caught the memo yet. So I actually think Relic Shield would be better, or the AD equivalent if you have to get it. But yeah, then they have you building all these AP items, which is interesting. I wouldn't say any of these items are bad on their own. This doesn't give her any resistances, so you wouldn't build this if you're trying to be the Soraka help, because it doesn't offer you any extra survivability. But if you are the carry and somebody's keeping you alive, then I suppose the Andre's Anguish is fine. It would synergize just fine with trying to do a lot of damage, so that's not a bad choice. Again, with a Void Staff, this would be like not really an item that you rush probably, and it's very limited value with Soraka. Like, I find it hard to believe that anyone would think that this is a good item to buy, but if you're buying a lot of like damaging items anyways, then it would be a passable choice. Again, I think if you're the carry, I guess you could build lots and lots of damage and rely on someone to protect you, but good luck finding somebody that dedicated. You could actually buy items that help keep you alive if you're the carry. And again, stuff like Rabadon's Death Cap, pure ability power. The problem with that is, even though it does boost your regenerative abilities, is people can still burst you down. So again, not a great choice. Something like Morellonomicon is a much more reasonable choice because it gives you the HP to help keep you tankier. Archangel's Staff, I hardly ever buy this item. It takes a long time for it to actually give you its full benefit, and for that reason I don't like to get it. I will buy Mana Mune sometimes though, because it's a lot more convenient to use, but anyway. And again, we have the problem with Astral Infusion being selected too often relatively early on, because Equinox is better. Star Call and Astral Infusion synergize really well, so the more points you put into Star Call, the better Astral Infusion gets. In other words, you don't really need points in Astral Infusion for Astral Infusion to be good. You just need to actually be good at landing your Star Calls, which is not too hard to do when you are picking keystones like Grasp of the Undying. So he could be silencing the enemies harder moving forward, but at least he made the right call to max Star Call first rather than Astral Infusion, as opposed to that first guide that we looked at, which had it backwards. Alright. So as you can see, there's a lot of trial and error with a lot of these guides. So you can look at some of this stuff. Some of it may be right, some of it may be wrong. I'm not here to make a mobifier guide, because I feel like if I did that, that would be the wrong thing to do. I do say that my #1 keystone is Grasp of the Undying. I'm gonna tell you guys that there are some other keystones that may be very good on her also, if you want to choose to go them. Just make sure you fit in Resolve in there somewhere, because you're gonna want Second Wind, and you're going to want to Revitalize, okay? So, the other keystones that I would recommend on her are Guardian, Fleet Footwork, Comet, and Summonary. So the reason Guardian is good, first of all, is you're probably not casting W very often as Soraka, okay? And you're also probably not close to your ally very often. Now, the problem with Guardian with some champions is you trigger it every single time it's ready, and you don't want that. You only want to trigger it when you actually need that movement speed. Now keep in mind, Guardian, when I say this is like probably the #2 best choice on her, I don't think it's good in low ranks. So if you're still low ranked, don't bother with Guardian, it's a waste of time. But if it's high ranks and your allies can actually make use of that Guardian, by all means take it. Moving forward, then we have Fleet Footwork. It gives you movement speed, it gives you survivability. There's nothing really to complain about here. If you like to build her a little bit tankier, it's not going to be as good as Grasp. But if you do build a lot of ability power on her, and maybe you build the occasional attack damage item like Trinity Force or Guardian Angel, then yeah, you'll get some extra value from that attack damage through your Fleet Footwork, whereas you wouldn't get so much from Grasp probably, since you're not building like HP and resistances and stuff. Then we have Comet. The Comet is an interesting choice because she doesn't actually reduce its cooldown, but if you know your ally can benefit from the ally trying to avoid getting hit by, the enemy trying to get hit by the Comet, then it could be sort of like an unseen crowd control, if you will. Kind of like Zillion casting a Q on someone, and then they have to walk away from their ally to avoid having their ally be damaged. So their ally's position affects where they're allowed to walk. So it's kind of like a hidden crowd control that the game doesn't actually even detect, which is interesting. At least not in the post-game stats, it doesn't. And so the much could be said the same for Arcane Comet. It's very similar to Zillion's Q, whereas it manipulates where the player's moving. And so your ally can potentially use that. And so if you do want to tell your allies what keystone you're running in the pregame lobby, then you can tell them you have Comet, and then they can pick around that. And then we have Summonary, which is, again, really dependent on your ally to get value out of it, because you can't even shield yourself with Airy, okay? The main reason why it's not going to be in the top, 2 or 3 here, is, along with Comet, is because it's not keeping you alive. It's only helping your team. And you already have so much that helps your team, and if your team's not watching your back, then you're going to be dying, and then you're not going to actually be able to do your job of helping your team. So that's why Airy is low on the top 5 list, along with Comet. So, let's go ahead and start taking a look at this replay of a recent game that I played with her. Make sure you buy things to scale with your kit. Try to manipulate the enemies, get them to trigger your... Oops, no, we weren't supposed to look at the replay. What am I doing? I already watched the replay. We're actually supposed to look at the video, right? Okay, yeah. Let's start the video over again. So I already controlled the camera and all that, so we can actually watch this right here. did real fast forwarding and anyway. Where were we? So because of the way her Q works, you can potentially slow the enemy down, and then you can catch up to them and hit them with your keystone after you've hit them with Q. And if they're trying to avoid your keystone, I mean, then it's easier to hit them with Q. So it just has really good synergy with your Q. That's why I really like Grasp. Guardian doesn't have that same value, but Guardian's still a decent choice for obvious reasons. So another thing to keep in mind is you do want to use your passive to stay alive in fights. So like in a big team fight, mid or late game, if there's like multiple skirmishes happening in a team fight, which there usually is, then if someone's trying to kill you, but also somebody else is trying to kill somebody else on your team, like that somebody else's, especially if they're a squishy champion, you might actually have boosted movement speed towards them, and you can just run towards them, and that'll actually keep you alive and also allow you to help them out. You can like 2 versus 1 the other guy. Like her movement speed is no joke. Like it's better than Janna's, and I would say the majority of circumstances, particularly in low ranks. In high ranks, I could see people getting more value from Janna's passive more often than in low ranks. As for whether or not that's more value than Soraka's, I'm not sure because I haven't been to high ranks. But anyway, moving forward, I do want to try to get to high ranks, and so I'm going to take this game more seriously. And part of me taking it more seriously is helping out the newer players by letting them know what's worked for me. So, yeah, make sure you get value out of all of your runes. Don't pick stuff like Hunter, which is reliant on you getting ahead, because that's not what Soraka's about, like Relentless Hunter or Ultimate Hunter. Soraka's about securing objectives, like having sustain. She's not about making the kills. If you make kills with your team, that's great, but our main goal is to just push the enemy out of the lane and push the tower, get that tower plate in, get that gold. Okay, this was my entire strategy plan here. That's why I'm not picking something like Dark Harvest like Jen has, because all I care about is pushing them out of the lane. See, if he had some sort of sustain, then he would be in a healthier position. But considering the fact that we both retreated, it worked out in our favor this time around because he was able to help me. Honestly, like Dark Harvest on Jhin is actually fine as the carry. Although generally speaking, I do think Execute might be a little bit better on average. But it really depends on your playstyle. If you prefer to let your lane partner do most of the work and you want to try to finish off the enemy, then Dark Harvest is fine. But if you want to help them out frequently in the harass, then Electrocute might be better. But again, like that might be a little bit risky, so it might not be worth it to actually pick up something like Electrocute. Honestly, generally speaking, like Fleet Footwork is a fine keystone. Fleet Footwork works on pretty much every champion. Like the only ones it's not going to be good on are the ones that typically aren't going to be having any interest in buying attack damage or ability power, or at least a very limited interest, such as like Braum, you know, or because like he's got like no abilities to scale with AD, and that isn't to say that you can't buy AD on him. It's just you don't have an interest in buying it. If you do buy AD items, it's just because the AD items are good. It's not because the stat is good, if that makes sense. Like Titanic Hydra, for example, is a pretty good item. Anyway, so we got ganked by a whole bunch of enemies, but that's okay. We are going to lose a lot of damage on the tower. I think we're actually going to lose our tower, but we do get... yeah, we lose it... I think Urgot might take out a tower first. No, he's still got like 3 plating on there. We probably lose ours first, but we're able to turn it around though in a big way later, as you'll see. Oh, and here we start doing some damage on their tower though now. Now, of course, somebody like Soraka, like her base HP value is not very high. So you can make the argument that the value from Demolish is too limited. Much like the value from summon area is too limited, considering she doesn't build much AP, because you'd rather build a balance of stats, right? Like, you want resistances on her in addition to your ability power, because it's not only important to keep your allies alive, but you have to keep yourself alive so you can continue to perpetuate the cycle of keeping your allies alive. So you keep yourself alive, or you can't do that. So, so purely selfless items are not okay on her, and purely selfish items are not okay on her either. That's basically what I'm trying to say. And the same goes for runes. And you're not gonna get use out of things like Relentless Hunter or Ingenious Hunter, things like this, because even Ultimate Hunter, you wouldn't want it on Soraka because it's not playing it safe. It's not dominating the enemy to the point of killing them. It's dominating to the point of making them retreat. That's what you want to do with Soraka. Your goal is to make the enemies give up. Like, if you're doing an objective and everybody has too much HP, oh, they give up. Oh, it's taking too long. We gotta give up. They're gonna overwhelm us eventually. We gotta retreat. Like, that's the feeling you want to generate in your opponents, not like, oh my goodness, what in the world just happened and just died. That's not what you're trying to achieve as a Soraka. I pulled off a heal with the Shaco, but it didn't damage any enemies. That was my first time casting Redemption in that game. I don't always get Redemption. I was just kind of like building whatever. I haven't played her in ages, and like my item sets are like kind of in a garbage place right now. Blah blah blah. I don't think it was a good item to build personally. If the enemy have a Zed, you're not gonna hit a Zed very often with Redemption. That's for sure. Jinx, if she gets any kills, is going to be somewhat slippery. Hecarim is ridiculously fast. You're probably not hitting him with that. Zerath and Nasus, though, you have a decent chance of hitting them if you really try. It kind of depends. But we're already dealing with Zerath pretty well. We don't need Redemption to deal with him, because we have Silence. And that's another thing you guys want to consider is counterpicking. You can probably get away with picking Soraka every single game if you give yourself a wide variety of items and rune pages to choose from. But if you're not, if your choices are limited because your champion pool is too large, then by all means wait to pick Soraka for when you're going to counter the enemy, because you're going to get a lot more effectiveness out of it. So I personally probably could have chosen a better rune than Mana Flow Band, I would imagine. Like, I don't think I ever was close to running out of mana. But, I don't know. I need to do more experimenting to see whether or not, like, no Mana Flow Bands would actually be viable on her. I would assume they would be, though, to be honest. And then having something like Transcendence could be pretty handy. Or, Scorch or Gathering Storm. Anyway, because Soraka doesn't necessarily, because she causes the enemies to retreat, there's a pretty good argument for taking Gathering Storm on her, to be honest. The only issue I have with the idea of taking it is it does leave you vulnerable relatively early before that the rune actually starts getting you value. So if you think your team can confidently play from behind, then Gathering Storm is fine, maybe even recommended. But otherwise, it might be a little too risky, because Soraka is kind of a low morale champ as it is already. So anyway, as long as you have the second win for survivability in both lanes and team fights, and then the Revitalize for the same, then you're good. You can pick whatever you want after that, as long as your keystone is decent and all the rest of your runes make sense for some reason or another. So you're going to watch the rest of this replay, and then I think we'll pretty much be just about done. You actually pause this real quick. And, So I'm thinking about something to talk about and do before I forget, because I might forget later. Let me show you guys the build real quick. So this is the build that I would personally recommend for learning your abilities. So around 3 and 5, it's a little bit loose. That is to say, you can pick up Astral Infusion at 3 if you want. And sometimes you might even want it at 2, but that's going to be extremely rare. But you definitely want to buy by level 4, I would say. There might be some matchups, but they're going to be very rare, where you're going to want more points in Equinox than in Starcall. Like, if for some reason you just have too much sustain, maybe you have, like, another healer as the carry or something like that, like a Taric or a Kael or something like that, then yeah, maybe Starcall won't get you as much guaranteed value as Equinox might be, because Starcall is not an instant cast, and so if you're trying to deal damage and stop the enemy from casting, Equinox is pretty good, which is why we're leveling it up second. The Astral Infusion gets plenty of value from just leveling up Starcall as it is. You don't need points in Astral Fusion for it to become better as you level up, because Starcall bleeds into Astral Infusion, so you get really good value as long as you're landing your Starcalls. And when you build keystones that keep you alive, like Fleet Footwork, Guardian, and Grasp, it's a lot easier to land those Starcall casts. So that's the build that I would recommend. If you are taking stuff like Comet and Airy, I definitely think maxing maxing Equinox is more often than not going to be the correct play with those keystones in particular. But never max Astral Infusion. There's never a good reason to do it. Don't believe what anybody else tells you. They're wrong. You don't want to kill yourself and make it so you can't heal your allies. You don't want to stay back so nobody else can use your attack damage. Just because you're not habitually buying attack damage items doesn't mean you don't actually have attack damage. That attack damage is not completely useless. It shouldn't be completely ignored. And yet that's what happens when you're like 4% HP because you're busy healing your allies too much. So make sure you get those keystones that keep you alive so you can have the proper sustain. You can actually have some good pushes and all that good stuff. You don't want to be hiding behind your tower. You want to be in front of the enemy's tower, smacking it with your attacks, as well as attacking the minions. And Cho'Gath gets pretty aggressive here, so I end up flashing over the wall to help him when I silence this Zerath here, so that way he can't finish off the Cho'Gath. Another thing to consider too is champion synergy. It's not just about counter picks. If you do have a champion like Cho'Gath who can get a lot of HP, Scion's another fine choice. I don't know how often people actually build tank on Scion, but anyway, Malphite, again, honestly, more and more I see people not building tank on Malphite, but for some reason, that they are building tank, then it could be a pretty safe choice, because then you could help heal him up. You get more value out of your W on tanks than you do anybody else, so just keep that in mind. Well, I just realized I forgot to talk about her boots options. So I think most good players will build boots relatively early, and so do I. That's not really going to be any different. As for when you upgrade your boots, I usually wait a little bit and try to analyze the game state to see what we need, regardless of what champion I'm playing. In the case of Soraka, her boots options might not be as extensive as others, but I do feel like there is room for some thought on which you should pick. So I do think the top choices would happen to be those that help keep her alive, and as such, those would equate to, most of the time at least, being the quickness boots, which keeps you like the most movement speed during combat, the red armor boots, which helps prevent, basic attacks from ruining your day. Then there's the magic resist boots, which give you some tenacity, which are pretty nice and against a lot of enemies. So it's going to be pretty situational. And there's also CDR boots which you can get, which can be pretty good depending on your strategy, especially if you're maxing E early. So, and that's it.